everybody. Welcome to The Take. I'm your host, Krishna Mano, and I am so excited to announce that in this episode, we will be having our first interview. Today, we're going to talk with 2018 Democratic candidate for Michigan's gubernatorial election, founder of Southpaw Michigan, author of Healing Politics, and co-author of A Citizen's Guide to Medicare for All, and public health policymaker and activist. I'm happy to welcome Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. Good evening, Dr. El-Sayed. Thank you so much for taking the time for this interview. It really is an honor to have you on the show.
Krishna, thanks for having me.
First of all, right off the bat, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Dr. Abdul El-Sayed. I'm a physician, epidemiologist. Formerly, I was the health commissioner for the city of Detroit. I host a podcast called America Dissected, and I do quite a bit of writing. I've written a couple books, and I write a newsletter called The Incision.
For viewers who haven't read your book, Healing Politics, how would you summarize it?
Well, I tried to get to the heart of what I think is the pathology underlying so much of the challenges that we face as a society. And I use my skills as an epidemiologist to try and connect the dots and diagnose what I call an epidemic of insecurity. And insecurity, not the colloquial kind of insecurity, the idea that you're sort of insecure about your situation in life. Rather, it's a chronic, widespread lack of access to the basic means of a dignified life, whether that's a good job that pays a living wage, a good roof over your head, access to healthy food consistently, access to good health care or housing, as a function of the circumstances of our society that have left us without the basic public goods that we've sold off to large corporations, to the exclusion of the poorest of us and the exploitation of so many others.
I always feel like the author of a book has a different perspective because they were the ones who actually put the thought behind all the text in the book. So what was your favorite part of the book as the author?
Well, I really enjoy telling stories, and I was able to recount a number of the stories from my own childhood, my time as health commissioner in Detroit, my time running for governor of Michigan. And I wanted to use those stories to illustrate something a little bit deeper. And so being able to share part of yourself, part of your life, part of your experiences with other folks, I think that's a fundamental human thing. And to be able to do it in a book, to tell a broader story about who we are and who we want to be, about where we are and where we want to go, I found really both fulfilling and hopefully meaningful to folks who pick up the book.
Mm-hmm. And personally, my most favorite part is when you talk about how you were the student giving the 2007 commencement speech at the University of Michigan, and after your speech, former President Bill Clinton walked up to you and he asked you if you're interested in running for any public office, and you responded by saying, and I quote, "Mr. President, I really appreciate you saying that, but I don't know if you saw my name, Abdul Rahman. There are 11 letters in my first name, and that's just my first name. People like me don't get to run for office." What did that feel like, telling a former president of the U.S. that you won't get the chance to run for office? Did you ever get a chance to talk to President Clinton during or after running for governor?
I didn't get to talk to him after or during running for office, but I did get to talk to him when I was health director in the city of Detroit. And he remembered the commencement speech he gave and the speech that I gave. It was obviously I'm really lucky to have been able to give this speech at my school and quite privileged in that respect. And obviously to be able to give a speech with somebody who is such a renowned orator. At the same time, the recognition and the moment to verbalize what some of the limitations of being a child of immigrants are in this country itself was somewhat sad. What I was saying at the time, I did not believe to be untrue. I believed that to be very true. And I still think to this day, despite the number of people who come from diverse backgrounds who've been elected to public office in this country, and namely the former president of the United States, Barack Hussein Obama, it's still a real challenge to run for office with a name that's uncommon, and particularly with a Muslim name. And so the being forced to sort of vocalize that was sad, but it was also an implicit challenge. It was also a recognition that probably shouldn't be that way. and maybe one ought to do something about it. I'll be honest with you, at that time, I had no intention of running for office, and ultimately was sort of driven to that by circumstance. And I think, somewhere probably operating in the pits of my subconscious, that still persists, that challenge of trying to make this country one where it shouldn't matter the name that you bring, and it shouldn't matter the color of your skin or where your family come from, that you have the opportunity to aspire to the highest ideal of citizenship, which is being elected by your country people to lead.
Yeah. After your 2018 campaign, you founded the organization Southpaw Michigan. Could you please tell us more about that and what you and your team have done for progressive candidates in Michigan?
Yeah, our goal was to build off of the movement that we'd built in our campaign, and to drive forward by supporting progressive candidates and causes. And we're really grateful to have been able to support actually 35 across 2018 and in 2020, 35 candidates and causes, supporting them both through fundraising, but then probably more importantly through grassroots efforts, phone calls and text messages and door knocking. It's only by engaging with people together to do the work of politics that we can succeed to change facts on the ground. And so it was a meaningful opportunity to continue forward with the work.
Mm-hmm. And before running for governor of Michigan in 2018, you went to medical school to become an epidemiologist. What inspired you to become a medical doctor in the first place?
Well, I really love people, and I love science. And, I spent a lot of my childhood summers in Egypt, where my grandmother had lost 2 infants before the age of 1 from 8 to whom she gave birth. And the crazy thing is, I was 15 hours away from where I grew up. I could go 15 minutes into the city of Detroit and cross into a community where the probability of a baby dying before the age of 1 was just as high, if not higher. And I got really interested in not just what happens beneath our skin to hurt people and take lives, but also what happens above our skin to drive that. And that's ultimately why I went to med school. I wanted to do something about that. And ultimately also why I don't practice clinical medicine. I came to believe that so much of our healthcare system, driven by the dollars and cents of very, very rich corporations, tends to chew up and spit out the people that it's supposed to serve most. And so much of the work that I do, rather than being in the system, is about being on the system, trying to build a system out of what we have that is more just, equitable, and sustainable.
Mm-hmm. And with your experience as a medical doctor, how would you have handled Michigan's COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I have to say that, our governor did a great job. And, considering the circumstances, obviously, I probably would have been the only governor in the country who'd ever actually handled an epidemic response before COVID. Hindsight is always 20/20. I do think that so much of what we've been able to do has been hampered by the politicization of this pandemic, and everything from where the virus came from to how we prevent ourselves from transmitting it to whether or not we're willing to take a safe and effective vaccine. But in the face of that, the kind of leadership that we've needed has been challenging to offer. It has hampered the efforts of anyone, and it would have hampered my efforts as well. The advantage I probably would have had is just simply, understanding what we were facing a bit earlier, and the kind of all hands on deck work that was needed to prevent it, even when it was small. That said, we are in a situation where more than a year and a half later, 700,000 of our sisters and brothers and mothers and fathers and sons and daughters have passed, and it didn't have to be this way. But it reminds us that, regardless of how advanced our society is and the technology that we have, the single most important technology that we have is public trust. And when we lose that, the ability to do very obvious things that can fundamentally change and save lives falls away, and we've suffered the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like people's childhood environment and parents and people who they're around more often when they're younger affect who you are the most. Your parents emigrated from Egypt, and as a son of first-generation immigrants like me, what do you think is the biggest message that your parents have told you that still sticks with you today?
I think it's not so much of what my parents told me, it's what they showed me. I came to understand very quickly that the life that I got to live was an accident of history. My father's father was a vegetable salesman. My father's mother never got to go to school. She was illiterate. And, I think about how far my family has come, and the opportunities that I had. That only happens because of a combination of just sheer luck and hard work. And also that so few people have the opportunity to do the things that my dad got the opportunity, that I got the opportunity to do. And that is a function of failure in terms of allocating basic resources across societies. And so, it's the fact that I came front and center with the kind of poverty that crippled so many in my family, that continues to cripple so many in my family, and that I came to recognize that the work in front of us is about trying to address that for other people, rather than, trying to accumulate for oneself. And, I think you can't grow up in those circumstances without asking, what's my responsibility to this? What's my responsibility to make sure that, opportunities for people aren't just an accident of history, that they are a function of a fair and equitable society.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of family, in your book, you talk a lot about how your father has really shaped your character. Were there specific moments or things that he did that still resonate with you today?
I was a bit of a punk when I was your age. I wouldn't have been hosting this podcast. I got in a lot of trouble. And I remember, I'd do the usual sort of, it's not fair, you're wrong. And my dad would say, he said, I don't care so much what you think about me when you're 12. I care about what you think about you when you're 35. And I do think that, there is a challenge. Not being a father myself now, there's a challenge to parenting, which is to say that you obviously love and care for your kids, more than they can ever know. And at the same time, sometimes that means that in the short term, you're going to make them very upset about certain circumstances, all in the effort to try and teach them a lesson about how the world actually is. And life is we want it to be nurturing and meaningful, but it's also hard. I mean, living is a hard thing. And I think sometimes we do too much to protect our kids from life being hard, rather than preparing them for life being hard, and endowing them the skills and the capacities of mind and character to be able to make it through. And my dad came from really hard circumstances, and so he knew that I had the liability of growing up in a place where I was quite coddled, and he made sure that was not the case. And I really, it wasn't always fun when I was a kid, but it certainly, I think, prepared me well for life, and helped me to see what life is really about. And so I'm really grateful to him for that.
Yeah. And when you were in high school, you played football, wrestling, and lacrosse, and was the captain for 2 of those sports. And with wrestling, you have to have confidence in yourself, as it's like an individual sport. But when you get into team sports like football and lacrosse, you have to have confidence in yourself, but also your team. Because if you work together, that's how you succeed. What has that experience of working as both a team and individually taught you about life?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really astute observation. I was really grateful to my teammates for electing me captain, and it's still to this day. I mean, obviously, I've gone on to do some things in my life, but as a young person, those things mean a lot to you, and I think so much of what I learned about leadership, I learned playing sports, because you're in a momentary circumstance. You don't have all day. You got to make split decisions, and you've got to invest in your teammates, and they have to invest in you. And oftentimes you're playing with people you don't really like. Like, you're not going to be friends with everybody on the team, but you do have to figure out how to work together to accomplish a goal that you guys share. And I think that's really, really important as a leader. It's also the ability to sort of put yourself out there and say, look, I'm going to do everything I can for us. And I hope that you will too. And I think when people see you invested in the outcome and invested in them, it says a lot about what you believe in your character, and I think people are more willing to come with you. And so I'm really grateful for that. And then the other thing about sports is that I was never really a great natural athlete, but I worked really hard at it, and it taught me a lot about hard work and discipline to achieve a particular outcome, right? Every day, putting in the work to train, to practice, to build, and over time you see the impact of that. And And I think that's really carried through in so much of what I've tried to do in my work. The other thing I'll say about sports is that it teaches you to fail. And I think in life, the ability to fail, the ability to lose and get back up is critical. And one of the things I think a lot about with my kid is that I want her to be able to love to win more than she hates to lose. I think oftentimes when you see people in competitive circumstances, they play out of fear of losing. And I just don't think that that's the best way to go about living. I think you need to enjoy and love working together to achieve the win more than you hate to lose. And don't get me wrong, like a healthy dislike of losing is never a bad thing, but it shouldn't drive you. And I think you meet people in the world who are super bitter because they've been forced to taste loss and and failure, and they don't know how to handle it. And I think I really appreciated the opportunity to learn how to lose in circumstances that, in hindsight, weren't all that important. You win or lose a football game, you win or lose a wrestling match. It's not the end of the world. When you win or lose an election that you put 18 months of your life in, and, thousands of people put their money in, and 330,000 people put their votes in, that's a bit more painful, but it's also, you learn to lose, and you learn to get back up and keep fighting for the things that you care about. And I think I learned a lot from my experiences on the, athletic field about losing and about how to manage and metabolize loss and make it and help it to make you better.
Mm-hmm. And after graduating high school, you went on to study at the University of Michigan, where you majored in biology and political science, which is a pretty interesting combination. Was there anything similar between them, or rather something you learned in one that perfectly fit in another?
Well, I think, you always want to cross-fertilize your brain with different ways of thinking and different means of information. And you start, a brain is a really fascinating thing. It can make connections where they aren't necessarily obvious. And people used to make fun of me. What does biology and politics have to do with each other, and how are you going to put those two things together? And I couldn't have told you back then, but I would say that, pretty much now what I do is exactly between biology and politics. But, if you think about it, right, biology is the study of the bad decisions that cells make that make people sick. But politics is the study of the bad decisions that societies make that often make people sick. And while we spend a lot of time and energy focused on the bad decisions cells make, we probably should spend a bit more time thinking about the bad decisions society makes. And so I'm grateful to have been able to think about, those two things in unison, and to see the cross-fertilization between them and the obvious connections. I think it's made me both a better scientist and science communicator, but it's also made me a better political analyst and politician. And I'm grateful for the both.
Mm-hmm. And this one is a really deep question and something that I've been wanting to ask you for a long time. What's it like being interviewed by Larry King? Because, no joke, because when you get interviewed by Larry King, that's like the top. Like, if this is the edge of space, then this is being interviewed by Larry King. So what was it like to be interviewed by the legend?
Maybe someday I'll get to say that I got interviewed by Krishna, and that'll be like the top, right? That was, he is a legend, and he's a really insightful guy. Someone who does quite a bit of interviewing on my own podcast. You can see that he's a master interviewer, and he's really good at finding the kernel inside the question and really digging for it, and also not rescuing you. I think great interviews, they know how to use silence, and he is phenomenally gifted at that. Obviously, I got to be interviewed by him a couple times at the end of his life, but he was still super with it, really really insightful and thoughtful, and also really kind, and I really appreciated that kindness.
Mm-hmm. And I've always wanted to ask you this too, even more than the last question. But in your book, you talk about how your stepmother is related to Abigail Adams, the second First Lady of the U.S. Do you ever flex about it? Like if someone says, my great-grandfather's best friend's dog's original owner's second cousin was Thomas Edison or something, you can say, well, I'm a direct descendant of Abigail Adams, fight me. Do you ever do that?
The irony of the whole thing is that I have a younger brother who's technically a half-brother, but, grew up together, and his name's Osama, which you can imagine gave him all kinds of heartache when he was a kid. But he is a direct blood relative of Abigail Adams. And so you just think about the irony of that. There's somebody out there named Osama who is a direct descendant of Abigail Adams. It destroys all your preconceptions about what an American is.
Yeah. And to conclude this interview, what most of us are wondering, Do you plan to run for office in 2022?
I don't know. I like to tell folks I occupy the greatest office in the land, which is father to my daughter, and I really enjoy doing that. And I also know that it's at some point being a private servant, which is at best what you are when you're a parent, is somewhat mutually exclusive to being a public servant. And so, I think I've got to put priorities forward, and I got to me, I just want to make sure that I'm a good dad. And a lot of people who can be a congressperson or a governor. And there's always going to be one, right? Every state always has a governor. Every district always has a congressperson. But I'm the only person who can be my daughter's dad. And I really enjoy it, and I find a deep meaning in it. And I think it makes me a better person, and hopefully someday will make me a better public servant again. So maybe someday, I don't know when that'll be. But for now, I'm enjoying being able to, engage in the broader conversation about where we go from here and what we need to do to cure that insecurity that we talked about, that I think has left us so vulnerable to this particular moment, and even before COVID has left so many people so vulnerable to the circumstances of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Viewers, if you're interested to learn more about Dr. El-Sayed, please check out his books, Healing Politics and A Citizen's Guide to Medicare for All. You're an inspiration to kids and students like me, so thank you so much, Dr. El-Sayed, for coming on the show, and good luck on your future endeavors.
Well, Krishna, it was my privilege, and like I said, when they ask me who I've been able to be interviewed by, I'll have to tell them there was Larry King, but then there was also Krishna Mano, and he was just as insightful and sharp. So good luck to you in your endeavors, and I hope that we cross paths again soon, okay?
Thank you so much.